Greetings, everyone. My name is Tanya Cupid, and I'm doing a summarization of Chapter 2, A New Kind of Faith, from the book Destroyer of the Gods, Early Christian Distinctiveness in the Roman World, by author Larry W. Hurtado for class NBST800. New Testament backgrounds. The first point of this chapter is that it is primarily concerned with the term religion and how it applied to the state of affairs of the first century CE culture. The differences between what was held as religion during the noted time frame and how it applies to modern times are discussed, which is the main point of contention for this chapter. We must realize that in this Roman era, it was a polytheistic culture, and many people believed in a multiplicity of gods. There was a God for every reason and for everything. Jewish culture, however, believed in a monotheistic God, Yahweh, which was accepted as a peculiarity of the Jewish nation by the surrounding community. The second point of this chapter is about this new kind of faith that emerges on the scene, initially called the Jesus movement, or what would become worldwide known as Christianity. The Jesus movement began in the early 1st century CE, following the life, the death, and the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who was crucified around AD 30-33, and whom appeared to his disciples after his resurrection. In this chapter, we are given a picture of what the culture was like during the early days of the Jesus Christ movement. In fact, the word Christian or Christianity was not a positive term. It was a negative connotation. Nonetheless, some significant moments from the early days of the Jesus movement are how they were viewed in the Roman era culture. In fact, it is said that how could anyone have taken Christianity seriously? Because Christianity lacked things that typically, and for most ancient contemporaries, essentially comprised religion. In that sense, what was considered religion in that time, the Christians didn't have it. And those things were, they did not have an altar, they had no cult image, they had no priesthood, no sacrifices, and no shrines. The Christian practice of singing a hymn to Christ as to God caused a lot of disruption within the cults and deity worshippers of the time, who we would just call pagans, demanded specifically that Christians should worship the traditional gods. Unlike with the other cults, gods, etc. of the time, Christianity practiced active recruitment, which for some was more offensive, that Christians would tell others to believe what they believed. Christians were considered antisocial and was said to have comprised a threat to the civil and political order of the time. There were other accusations that were made against Christians in the Roman era. It was said that Christians engaged in orgiastic sex, incest, and cannibalism. Christians engaged in superstition. It was said that Christians' religious beliefs and rituals were deemed excessive, repellent, and even monstrous. Christians were believed to be atheists. Christians were to live a way different from the culture around them. For instance, they did not believe in infant exposure. They believed that husbands should confine their sexual relations to their own wives and none others. They did not believe in the sexual abuse of children. And they did not participate in the gods and idols of the Roman culture. For example, eating known meals prepared for meat sacrificed to gods, etc. The strength of this chapter are that it provides a good understanding of what the first believers endured, physically, emotionally, and mentally, during the early stages of Christianity. We are told how they were viewed by others in the culture, including the Jewish nation from whence it had begun. Furthermore, this chapter shows that this religion developed into a distinct religion or faith encompassing its own social, behavioral practices, meaning that Christians were to live a certain way, were not to do certain things as proposed in the letters that Paul wrote, the epistles that Paul wrote to 1 Corinthians and to other places. Christians were to adhere to this so that you were seen as different. Additionally, it speaks to how those in the Jesus movement pursued others should join their movement. In other words, we see the first instances of evangelism or religious recruitment, something the other deity worshippers or cults didn't do. Now, when we were asked to talk about weaknesses, quite honestly, I do not see any relevant weaknesses in the data or the chapter's historicity. I looked online to see what scholars and reviewers had explicitly said about this chapter. I found that these persons mentioned that the chapter had an insufficient connection to contemporary relevance, potential bias in interpretation, and a lack of contemporary applicability. In my opinion, the chapter presented the data on the beginnings of Christianity as it intended to do. It was not a chapter explicitly created to connect the historical past with the modern times. It was used as intended to provide an understanding of the first century after the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ and his subsequent followers as they did what Jesus asked them to do, which was to spread the word. In conclusion, this chapter mainly showed how this new religion differed from the standard religious practices of the time, thereby initiating a new religion that the world had never seen before. Yet over time, we can see that what began during the Roman era spread dramatically across the known world. It remains prevalent today, whether people believe it or not. Again, this is Tanya Cupid for NBST800, New Testament Backgrounds. Have a great day, everyone.